Next, from Springfield, we attend a House committee hearing on whether the state should raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour. We'll first hear from minimum wage earners and Representative Mary Flowers, who support raising the minimum wage, followed by small business owners and representatives of the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, who oppose a $15 minimum wage. This runs about 40 minutes.
My name is Jason Keller with Illinois AFL-CIO Legislative Director. Our organization has always helped lead on the increases in the state's minimum wage in recent history in 2003 and in 2006. It obviously has been 7 years since the wage has been increased, which is far too long in our opinion. We believe that increasing the state's minimum wage is good for the state's economy and causes a tide that lifts all of Illinois' working families in our state. So I have with me on my right Mark Joseph Solis, I believe, Sheldies, and he would like to provide some oral testimony.
Please proceed.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Sheldies. I'm a leader with One North Side in Chicago of the Workers' Rights Issue Team. Okay, I have been a low-wage or minimum wage worker for much of the last 30 years. I have also been homeless for some of that time. Homelessness is not at all unusual for a minimum wage worker. Many of us who are experiencing homelessness while working for the minimum wage try to work our way out of it. We might try to do that with or without someone's help. But in doing so, we face almost insurmountable difficulty, although sometimes we meet with success. But then, or those of us who work our way out of homelessness, working the minimum wage, like the other minimum wage workers who are not homeless, we work our lives away at difficult, often very strenuous, and demeaning jobs, often needing to work more than one of those to get by, simply for the privilege of living in poverty. Homelessness among minimum wage workers is in fact not at all unusual. Very many, if not most minimum wage workers that I have known have been homeless, many more than once or twice in their lives. A significant number spend their entire adult lives moving in and out of homelessness, always at risk, living just at the threshold, 1 or 2 paychecks away from going back to the street. I've known a few minimum wage workers, proper and sober individuals, who even chose homelessness for a time so they could save some money to buy a car, for example, or make child support payments, or build up some savings to not be completely broke after paying the rent. Unwisely, I would say, of them. They're unrealistically thinking they'll easily be able to come out of homelessness once they've accomplished what they wanted with the savings they made. There are many devilish choices one has to make when living in poverty. All this I speak of is for a bachelor like myself. I can't imagine what it is to try to support a family on the minimum wage. Working people deserve a fair wage and a just compensation for their work, and that isn't the least an employer can get away with paying them. There should be, in this once and future great country, no such thing as the working poor. Anyone who works full-time should be able to provide decent housing, education, and health care for themselves and their families. They deserve to be able to provide for themselves and not have insult added to the injury of their poverty, being forced to go on welfare or made charity cases. I urge the General Assembly to pass a law making the minimum wage $15 in Illinois so that by 2020, low-wage workers can earn a more living compensation. That's all.
Thank you, sir.
Up next, we're going to give the mic over to Valerie Thomas, who's going to provide further testimony.
Please proceed, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Valerie Thomas, and I'm a home care worker through the Department of Aging. I live in Belleville, Illinois. I'm here to testify in favor of raising the wage in Illinois to $15 an hour. This is a family affair for me, since I've seen firsthand the struggles of workers who make less than the living wage. My mom, she does home child care for my niece and makes substandard wages. My niece has been working at Walmart for 15 years, making substandard wages. Recently, she was afraid to take off work when her 3- and 6-year-old children had 102 fevers because she can only get so many points or get fired at Walmart. If it wasn't for my mom doing home child care for my niece, she wouldn't know what to do. My mom also makes substandard wages doing child care. My sister is a home care aide for my father, who is a veteran, and she makes less than the living wage. We took him out of a nursing home because they let him fall, they over-medicated him, and they tied him down. My other sister is a personal assistant who cares for her mildly retarded son, making less than a minimum wage. She had to quit her job so she could do this for her son. And I have been a home care health worker for 5 years. I have a bachelor's degree in workforce education and development. But I care for several low-income seniors who, but for me, would be forced into institutions. None of us are getting rich by doing this. In fact, I'm not able to afford my own place. I don't have extra savings to repair my car, so if my car breaks down, I can't go to work. We're all getting by check, bill by bill. We arrived at our professions by a series of events, choices, and needs. But none of us are doing this out of any sense of greed or entitlement. We just want to get by with a roof over our head and food on our table, and to make sure that the people we love are cared for. Now, opponents of a $15 minimum wage in Illinois have made the insulting claim, without providing a shred of evidence, that increasing the wage floor puts Illinois at a competitive disadvantage. This is the same argument that was used to justify keeping child labor and against establishing a minimum wage in the first place. Opponents of the wage increase also want to leave you with the impression that these low-wage jobs are filled only by teenagers and college kids in their summer jobs. The statistics show otherwise, but I'm here to tell you firsthand that this is just not true. If the opponents of a $15 minimum wage want to come with me to walk a day in my shoes, they are more than welcome. I will show them that this is not easy work, and the pay is not adequate for all that we do. It's just that simple. As you know, there are several industries that are considered women's work and have been underpaid as a result of systematic and widespread discrimination over the years. This includes the fields of healthcare and childcare, which also happens to be among the fastest growing pieces of Illinois economy. But wages for these industries are far below standard, leaving families like mine struggling. This is on its own creating a dangerous and self-perpetuating cycle. My dad had a stroke recently, and he has dementia. It's very important to us that we keep him at home. We won't be able to do this with wages we make. I'm sure there are thousands of families across Illinois facing the exact same struggles that we are. And I am wondering what our elected representatives would do for us and when. Well, now is the time to act. Now is the time for a $15 minimum wage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas, and thank you for coming up from Belleville. Representative Flowers has joined us. Representative, we had some brief statements from Representative Harper and Representative Guzzardi regarding generally the minimum wage, not really specific bills. Would you like to add anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and thank my colleagues for bringing forth similar legislation. I think yesterday we should have had $15 an hour. Some say it would be a burden on the employers. I say the burden have been on the employees because they've been working 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet. And if we were to increase their wages, the economy would be better off. We would increase the standard of living for children and for poor families and impoverished. We would have more money for the consumers to spend in the businesses. I don't know if you were paying any attention to the news here in Springfield, but about 5 or 6 stores are going to close. The reason why there are no customers, the reason why there's no customers, they don't have the excess money because they're busy paying higher taxes, higher fees, higher fines. And this reminds me of when Walmart first started. Walmart would hire the workers and would encourage them to go to the state to get their insurance, to go to the state to get their benefits. And quite frankly, that's all we're doing. We are subsidizing private businesses when we continue to pay these low wages because these poor working people are dependent upon the state to give them their food stamps, the state to give them their benefits, the state to help them with their child care, the state to help them with their rent. So we can either continue to allow them to be a burden on the state or allow them to be independent and self-sufficient. And we could do that by giving them a decent wage. And when I looked at all the people that was against this bill, I was really appalled because no one with the National Association of Theaters, the Chicagoland Chambers, the Department of Human Services, the Illinois Chamber, the Illinois Institute of Technology, the Illinois Licensed Beverage, none of these people could live off the wages that we are requiring these people to live off of. Since 1938, it started at 25 cents an hour, and now we're only up to $8 and something an hour. Really? How can you pay your rent with $8 and something an hour and send your child to school? Car fare has gone up, gas has gone up, everything has gone up but the minimum wage for the poor working people. And the rich people, quite frankly, have gotten richer because they have been making poor people work longer hours for less pay. It's not right what we're doing to working people. When you think about the stress, the medication, the anger, the overcrowding of the jails, it's all because of the stress that we're putting on them. We're causing them to cause harm to their children, making families separate, wards of the state, incarceration. All of that's costing us money. We need to stop and think about what it is that we have been doing to our families and to our constituents. We need to raise the minimum wage. I said $15 an hour, but quite frankly, if I had to redraft this bill again, it would be $17.50 an hour. $17.50 an hour, and that way people will be able to sustain themselves without reaching out to us for handouts so we could tell them, no, we can't because the state can't afford it. Well, if you think we can't afford it, how do you think they feel? CME got a tax credit. Sears got a tax credit. Every business, most businesses here in Illinois got a tax credit. Any business that moved to the city of Chicago, they said, come here, we'll give you a tax break. Or the TIF, you'll take our TIF money. So you can call it TIF, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but it's funny how when it comes down to poor working people, we call it a subsidy. Well, let me tell you another form of subsidy. Another form of subsidy is food stamps. Another form of subsidy is welfare, Medicaid. So what you're talking about, we can go around in circles, and every time you say something, I could say something different, but it would be the same, but to you it would be different. But no business person would be able to live and feed and take care of their family and become prosperous, making the wages that we're forcing poor people to work. Not that they're not qualified. They are very qualified to work, but you know that you can get the labor for cheap. And that's exactly what's happening.
There are a lot of people in this state who own businesses who don't pay themselves because they have to pay their employees. I would say that there are a lot of business people in this state who aren't making the
And I'm
minimum
not
wage
going to argue the
themselves.
point, and I'm going to say that there's lots of businesses in this state that can afford to pay themselves and do not give their workers a wage increase. And so, again, we can argue back and forth. But the fact of the matter is, it's unrealistic. And every time we have this debate, we always talk about what's going to happen, how the businesses are going to leave. But every time we give the raise, more businesses start up. They don't leave the state.
That is not dependent upon the wage rate that's being paid. That's dependent upon other economic circumstances. And may I, for the record, state, I have not voted ever once for a tax break for any business in this state
You
either.
haven't been here long enough. Take my word.
Mary, I love you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rob Carr, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Rob Carr, Illinois Retail Merchants Association. No surprise, IRMA stands in strong opposition to the concept of increasing the Illinois minimum wage. A proposal to increase the minimum wage to $15 statewide would increase starting wages by 81.8%, spread over 5 years. That's a 16.36% average. I can't imagine anyone that's able to absorb 16% increase in costs without making difficult decisions to adjust it. Keep in mind, those are just labor costs. As discussed earlier, the City of Chicago and Cook County have enacted their own wage increases, but I'll focus on the City of Chicago because they're further along. The counties doesn't take effect till July 1. City of Chicago is currently at $10, and they increased to $11 on July 1st of this year, and yet they're already experiencing problems as a result of the path they have chosen. And the path they have chosen has been one of reaching into the pockets of employers with both hands as their respective starting wages increases. In addition to the substantial and numerous tax increases, they have imposed numerous mandates as well, and we know there's more to come as their finances are far from stable. So let's review the experiences that they're having. Unemployment among workers with few or no skills continues to cling to historic levels, particularly among 16 to 24-year-olds. As noted earlier by the proponents, the results are even worse in minority communities. Unless you're an employer in the Loop or the near Loop, or in the wealthier geographical pockets of Chicago, you are suffering. The only thing propping the Loop businesses afloat at this time is tourism increase. And if that bubble bursts, they're in real trouble. Several municipalities have opted out of the counties to date, even though it hasn't taken effect, and food deserts and medically underserved areas are getting worse, not better, and this further destabilizes neighborhoods. Given that experience, we're frankly a little baffled why why the state would want to inflict on communities outside of Chicago the same negative outcomes. Why at a time when the reputation of the state is what it is, which is one of decline and not of opportunity, we'd want to snuff out what little opportunity exists. But if that doesn't convince you, let's look at Seattle. The Seattle City Council, the same body that enacted a $15 minimum wage, also commissioned a study, and here's what that study found. Fewer available jobs for no-skilled or low-skilled workers. Total weekly earnings dropping by as much as $5.22, but there's some play in that. Employers reduced hours to control costs. They're finding evidence of employees switching from jobs in Seattle to neighboring jurisdictions because they could work more hours. And they noted very clearly throughout that this is the experience of Seattle, even though they're experiencing a strong economic boom fueled by manufacturing technology, which Illinois is not experiencing. And keep in mind as well that Seattle's minimum wage has not fully taken effect for small employers with 500 or fewer employees. They don't get to $15 until 2021, and yet that's where most of the hiring occurs. And it's important, I think, to note that these proposals don't exist in silos yet. That's how we like to discuss them, as if that is how they're experienced by employers. But that's not how they're experienced by employers. As the experience in Chicago and Cook County demonstrates, employers have one pocket. The money that goes into that pocket is generated by sales. The money that goes out of that pocket is the result of cumulative expenses. Employers can't simply raise prices or levy some sort of tax and fee to make up the difference. They have to make brutally difficult choices every day on who to hire, who to lay off, who loses hours, what benefits they reduce or eliminate, and ultimately whether or not to remain open. The results that we're hearing from employers in the city of Chicago to date is 25 to 30% increase in their bottom line over last year. 25 to 30%. That's simply unsustainable. They have no means of growing those sales. In fact, sales are fleeing the state. In the last 3 years, Illinois has lost at least 78,000 individuals. Retailers don't see those as statistics or faces. They see those as sales leaving the state of Illinois. So let's look at the impact of that. In the apparel, that's 144 million in lost Illinois sales. In food, it's almost 548 million. Entertainment, 221 million. Transportation, 741 million. And for just these categories, there are many more. That's just a bare minimum of 1.6 billion in lost economic activity. That's $103.4 million lost in state sales taxes alone. That doesn't include the lost income taxes from the individuals who left the state or the impacts on local governments. Let's not forget the impact on not-for-profits and the impact these raises like this will have on the youth programs offered by such entities such as the YMCA or park districts. The problem is, at some point, whether this year or next, Springfield is going to be forced to enact very large tax increases that will pale in comparison to what the city of Chicago and Cook County have done to date. It will be the only way to fully address the fiscal challenges we all face. So any additional costs added today will only be compounded in the not-too-distant future when we finally confront the fiscal reality. There's much talk of returning stability to Illinois. Stability is impossible without restraint. Stability is impossible without the predictability that comes from that restraint. And restraint means confronting the truth that Springfield will be asking employers to pay a lot more in taxes. And the results that we've seen from Chicago, the city of Chicago, and Seattle will be inflicted upon the rest of the state. So that is why at this point we stand in opposition. I'd be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Michael Reaver with the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce. We as well strongly oppose the raising of the minimum wage to $15 an hour statewide. As some of what Rob already mentioned or alluded to, just to provide some context, the City of Chicago and most recently Cook County raised their starting wages to $13 an hour to reach $13 an hour by 2019 and 2020 respectively. During the Mayor's Working Family Task Force, which focused on a different issue, the Chamber consistently heard, along with IRMA, from employees in focus groups that their hours were cut as a consequence of the wage increase. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and the Chicagoland Chamber remains opposed to increasing the minimum wage rate. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Ed Schubert. Mr. Schubert is the owner of the Northbrook Dairy Queen. Please proceed, and thank you for coming down, sir.
Thank you for having me here. After listening to everybody, I'm on both sides of the fence. I believe in people making minimum wage, and I believe in people making a living wage. I have talked about this for many, many years, and I've talked to my representatives. I believe we should have a 3-tiered minimum wage. Me as a small employer, I have young adults, teenagers working for me. I have young adults, 18 to 21, working for me. I have older people working for me. If I have to pay a 15-year-old kid the same amount as I'm paying a 25-year-old person, it is going to put me out of business. And it's going to put a lot of other small businesses out. I had prepared a speech, but after listening to everybody, I can't stress enough, and I agree with the gentleman over there, automation is going to take a lot of jobs if you raise the minimum wage across the board. I have roughly about 20 employees work for me during the summer. If you break those down, I have 5 to 6, 14 to 16, 17-year-olds working for me. I have 18 to 21s working for me, about 5 or 6, and I have another 6 or 7 older people work, which are usually the managers. Now, those managers all make $13 to $15 an hour. Where do they go from that? Those managers usually have gone on to working for Red Lobster or working for TGI Fridays as store managers, making $40,000 and $50,000 a year. My point is I can only afford to pay those managers that $15 an hour or $14 an hour, but you have to lower the wage for those younger adults. I teach them. I'm like a school. When they come to work for me, I've got to teach them how to be there on time. I got to teach them how to work, clean the bathrooms, mop the floors. But yet, if I got to pay them $15 an hour, guess what? They ain't going to have a job. You know, we're going to either go to automation, we could be out of business. I don't know. You have to really think this through. I've got a 26-year-old that works for me right now. He has worked for me for the last 10 years. He started for me when he was 16 years old. He has Down syndrome. Now, I pay him minimum wage. Why do I pay him minimum wage? Because he's only got so much productivity in him to be able to make him worthwhile. Actually, I pay him basically out of my own pocket because he can only do so much. You need to think about that. I have looked for tax credits on that issue for years, and nobody can come up with any kind of tax credits that I can get. I have hired kids that were deaf mutes. I have a deaf mute school right down the road. Can't get any credits for them. In fact, my young kid that works for me, Mikey, that's 26, his money that he makes gets taken off of his disability, Social Security. Is that fair? You know, I try to treat all my employees the same, but they have to work their way up the ladder, they have to earn their raises, and they have to do a good job. Like I say, I'm on both sides of the fence. I agree that people have to make a living wage, but in the fast food industry, and I've been there 44 years, and my family hopefully is going to be there another 44 years as my daughter is starting to take over the business on a daily basis. But we won't be there if you raise across the board $15 an hour. Two things are going to happen. One, we're going to have to raise prices dramatically. Two, somebody's going to lose jobs because we are going to bring in automation. And in our industry, Dairy Queen is already starting to come up with things to do it. And I certainly know McDonald's and Wendy's and all the rest of them are doing the same thing. So you're going to have a net loss of jobs. I propose the 3-tiered minimum wage, and it makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schubert. Mr. Knight?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Doug Knight with Knight's Action Park here in Springfield, Illinois, third generation. My family's business started in 1930, and I grew up in it. When I was big enough to pick up a golf ball, I started working for the company. Actually started getting a paycheck when the minimum wage was 70 cents an hour. At this time, we employ over 200 people during our season, mostly high school and college students. We have over 60,000 hours of labor during our season. For every dollar the minimum wage goes up, my wages go up $75,000. To go to $15 an hour, my wages are going to go up $506,250. I want to know where that money is going to come from. All right, we're weather dependent. My season is shortening because early school starts. We're losing like 2.5 weeks. You guys all know what happened to the state fair. They start school in the middle of the state fair. Their revenues are in half. At any rate, so where's the money going to come from? I have to raise my prices. I can't raise my prices. If I raise my prices, my guests are going to go to Missouri or Wisconsin or save their money and go to Orlando or Kentucky or Tennessee or wherever. The other thing is to lower my costs. Well, I have to staff for safety. I really can't cut my hours. I've cut my hours about as much as we can. We really watch and make sure nobody does any overtime. If you go to $15 an hour, I would venture to guess there won't be any more overtime for anybody. I mean, everybody is lucky to get more than 30 hours a week with the ACA law. Now, I don't think many people are getting 40 hours a week anymore. that are starting. You've got college students. 45% of college students are either unemployed or underemployed. If you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, the people that you think you're going to help, you're going to put out of a job. Those college students and the people that are retired now are going to say, man, that's a pretty good wage. You know, my investments or what I save for my golden years really is going to stretch as far as I thought it was going to do. I'm going to go back to work for $15 an hour. So number one, it's going to be inflationary. Illinois needs to be competitive. If you're going to bring a business into the state, which side of the river are you going to go on? You're going to go on the Indiana side of Danville, or you're going to build in Danville? Or are you going to be in the Illinois side or the St. Louis or Missouri side? I mean, if you're going to have to pay double in wages, I think the answer would be obvious. Because with the wages also goes workman's comp and your share of FICA and your share of Medicare and all that stuff. I believe that half of my help is high school students, half's college students. Minimum wage to me is a place where you start your working career. It's not a place you should be stuck in for the rest of your life. Less than 10% of my kids that come to work when we do an orientation, I ask them how many have learned the term work ethic, and less than 10% raise their hand. And that's a crime that the schools are not teaching the kids to be ready for the workforce when they get out of high school. That's their job. And I agree with the gentleman down there. And what we do is we try to get them ready to move up the ladder. We talk to them about building a resume. We talk to them about getting their dream job. We want them to go on and do great things, and my kids do that. They go on and do great things. I mean, they have law enforcement, career military, doctors, even got an engineer for NASA in the pipe work there. So I really can't cut my hours. It's going to be stifling to business. I would like to grow my business, but if I can't tell my bank that I'm going to be able to meet my debt service, that, sorry, I'm going to lose $400,000 next year, but I'd like to borrow $1 million, they're not really going to be receptive to loaning me money for that next attraction I'd like to put in. To quote Milton Friedman, minimum wage is legalized discrimination against teenagers and the less educated. Every time that minimum wage is increased, unemployment among those groups rise. My biggest fear is when you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. I hire kids from 15 to whatever. Usually by the time they're out of college, I mean, I've got a guy that's worked for me for 20 years. But usually by the time they're out of college, they're going on to start interviewing for that place that they're going to start, their real work career. If you give a 15 or 16-year-old $30,000 an hour, what do you suppose is going to happen to the dropout rate? Back in the gross receipts tax days, it was 10%, and I had the pleasure of listening to some school administrators saying we should be more like South Carolina. And I'm like, South Carolina's got a 50% dropout rate. Why do we want to be like South Carolina? Well, we're at 25 right now, so I guess we can get to 50 if you want to do it. I mean, and those kids are not going to find jobs when they drop out of high school. It's going to be a downward spiral. I would propose if you were going to do the minimum wage increase, that perhaps it would be tied to whatever our health care law is going to be. It's 26 years old now. Maybe, by the time they get out of college and they're getting out on their own, that might be a good time to start thinking about a minimum wage increase. But when they're living under the roof with mom and dad, maybe not. They need to learn work ethic and skills and things like that. 79% of the workforce, minimum wage workers, work part-time jobs. 62% are enrolled in school during the non-summer months. The average family income is $65,000 an hour because they got kids working, you got somebody working a second job, or mom's doing a part-time job after dad gets home from school or whatever. And most have not finished their education. Just 4% of minimum wage workers are single parents working full-time. 3% of our workforce is working minimum wage jobs. I really want to stay in business, and this will seal the lid on the coffin if you were to take this to $15 an hour. There is no way I could make ends meet. I can't cut anymore. I can't raise my prices. And I don't have a $500,000 to pay out in wages. And I'm sure there's a lot of businesses out there. I mean, I know there's a lot of workers living check to check. I, as a business owner, also am living check to check. I've got 4 kids to raise, one with a disability. And when he started talking about his employee there, you know, I'm genuinely concerned about her welfare and what she's going to do after she's out of school. You know, it's a big problem. But, well, I appreciate you inviting me here to come to talk, and I want to wish you would vote no for a minimum wage increase.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. We understand you have a very thriving, very good business, and we certainly don't want to see you go out of business. Mr. Grant with the NFIB, if you could
I'll keep it brief.
keep it brief, thank you.
Yes. Mark Grant, I'm the State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business here in Illinois. We have 11,000 members. They're all small business owners like Doug and the gentleman down the table. I want to point something out that was said a little bit earlier. Some of the proponents talk about the large big box stores and what they pay. They don't make up that many businesses in Illinois. Over 90% of the businesses in Illinois are small, 90%. And the majority of them have less than 10 employees. And they will suffer the most when this happens. You heard it from Doug. It's the thing that's really has to be taken into consideration for any kind of a vote. Illinois' current minimum wage, it already leads our surrounding states, who, by the way, are passing pro-economic policies that are leading to business growth and a greater demand for labor, which leads naturally to higher wages. And I think that was pointed out a little bit earlier. That's the way you get higher wages. You have demand for labor. Our small businesses are struggling in Illinois. The state has a very poor and weak performing economy, and this bill would nearly double their labor costs. We can't afford to do it. The small businesses work on very thin margins, and this will hurt so many of them. If you want examples of what happens when you raise the wage to $15 an hour, take a look at the website called Faces of $15. You will find scores of small businesses that have closed their doors in cities like New York, Oakland, Albany, Santa Clara, Seattle, Flagstaff, and now even Chicago. We ask, how did that wage hike help the workers who lost their jobs at those places? Government-mandated wage hikes do not help most workers, especially the unskilled who are trying to get their first jobs. It does not put more spending money into local markets, since every dollar a worker gets comes out of the customers or the owner's pockets in those markets, so they spend less. Let me just say that mandating minimum wage hikes is bad policy, and it does not alleviate poverty. Thank you.
Thank you.